second session of our convection steam oven event, virtual here at the Denver showroom. I'm Chef Ben Davis, and Lynn Sorensen, who is our showroom manager, is with us today. She's running the board, if you will, from the back. So you might hear her popping in from time to time with your questions. She'll relay them to me, and then I'll be able to answer them for you. I'm hoping that everybody got to join yesterday, and certainly if you have questions from yesterday's session, feel free to ask those now. And during today's session, we're certainly not going to just say you can only ask about what's going on today. We want to be able to answer your questions from yesterday as well. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the features that are embedded in the oven, the gourmet features, some of those different things that maybe you haven't availed yourself of because you've just scratched the surface with our quick start mode and our basic mode. But we want to talk about those gourmet features because they can really make your life easier, save you the trouble of hunting down techniques and recipes on the internet or in a cookbook or something along those lines, because all of the recipes that are built into the convection steam oven are designed for exactly that. So whether you're just going to cook some vegetables, or maybe you want to roast a leg of lamb or something of those lines, they're all in there, and we want to be able to explore those. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of those modes that are a little more esoteric, things like preservation or sanitizing, which is obviously a big thing in our lives today, but also the spa mode. If anybody wants to heat up some towels, or they are really into doing Swedish hot stone massage, we have a mode for that in here as well. And then some of those things like proofing, we have a proof mode, warming mode, so you can use it as a holding oven in case you just need to hold a small dish in there and you don't want to use your large oven. We have that. We want to explore those. We'll talk a little bit about just how to program your own recipes so you can save your favorite techniques in there, and then it's easy as just hitting a couple of buttons and you can go right back and prepare that dish in the way that you've chosen is best for you. And then we'll talk about cleaning, the really exciting part. We'll talk about the best way to maintain and clean the oven, so that if you need to do just a spot cleaning, or maybe you need to do a deeper cleaning, we'll talk a lot about that. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the recipe that I'm providing for you today, which is a bread recipe. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there making bread. Some people might go whole hog and start making their own starter, and they're doing a 4-day fermentation in their refrigerator to get that bread really, really flavorful. But maybe you don't want to work quite that much, but you want to still have a very nice loaf of bread. I'm going to show you how to make a very simple loaf of bread. It can be done over the course of 1 or 2 days, or even extended and done over the course of a week if you want to develop a little more flavor, and we'll provide you with that instruction as well. So make sure you're asking those questions through the chat feature, and we can answer them as we go. And we'll talk a little bit about any of those answers that we need during the session. So just a quick refresher, reminded that everything is operated on the oven with these words and buttons that are here to the left, right of the screen. Remember, the screen is not a touch screen, so you can bang on it all day, but nothing's going to change. But these are how we wake up the oven. Any one of those buttons will turn the oven on, and then we can activate it. All right. So in addition to the quick start feature, which is I like to call it the manual transmission, we have the gourmet feature, which is where the oven will do a lot of the decision making for you. So in the case of you've never steamed an artichoke, or you want to hard boil some eggs, but you're not sure exactly how to do it, the gourmet feature is going to have a lot of those things in there so that you can just touch a button and off you go. And it's easy to wake it up. You just touch gourmet here, and now you get a series of food groups. As opposed to cooking methods, we're actually going to break it down into food groups: vegetables, meat, poultry, eggs, baked goods, desserts, side dishes, potatoes. All of those things are in there, and so that you can kind of just roam through and choose what you want to do. Now, in some cases, there's going to be only one way programmed into the oven to cook something. And a good example of that may be, what's a good example? An artichoke. Most people don't roast artichokes, so we're going to steam an artichoke. And the way we would select that is simply by scrolling using our arrow keys until we find the vegetables, which is the first one. And then you have a list now of different vegetables that they have pre-programmed cooking techniques in there for. So the first one is leaf spinach, but let's scroll over until we find an artichoke, which I know is in here next to the asparagus, summer squash. There we go, artichokes. So it just has you say cook right? You touch it, there's a little steam icon right next to it. When you touch it, it tells you don't preheat the oven. Do it on one level, but you could do it on multiple levels if you chose to. It depends on how large your artichoke might be. You're going to scroll over, and now it's going to tell you how it's going to cook. It's going to use steam at 210 degrees, and it says it's going to take about 28 minutes to do that artichoke. And so then it'll just steam it for you, and then off you go. You scroll over to the end, hit start operation. If you want to be impatient, just hit it, and off you go. And now the oven is heating up, and the artichoke is in there, and we're steaming away. So there's just methods like that in there that are for quick shortcuts, if you will. If you don't really know exactly how you want to cook it, that'll help decide it for you. But in other instances in the gourmet mode, we may have choices of how we'll cook something, right? So an example of that might be in the meat section. And if we open up meat and we look at that, we can choose by the different varieties of meat: veal, beef, pork, leg of lamb. Interestingly enough, leg of lamb is the only lamb that they have in there right now. But beef in there, and we may say, let's see how many different ways we can cook a tenderloin, right? So we have two methods in here that you can choose to cook the tenderloin in. One is a slow roast mode, and the other one is what we call low temperature cooking. They're both slightly different in terms of how the oven operates, but they're going to walk you through it completely so that you don't really have to make a decision in terms of how you're going to program the oven. So if you choose, say, low temperature cooking, you turn it on. Again, it tells you you don't need to preheat the oven. The next choice is going to tell you just cook it on one level. It's going to give you a little gourmet tip here. And that gourmet tip in this case is put the roast or the piece of beef in a suitable vessel and place on the wire shelf. So you might use a roasting pan that you have at home, or even a 9x13 Pyrex pan would work fine, or a metal pan, and put your seasoned piece of meat in there. And then you're going to put it on that wire rack that comes with your oven. And then you're going to scroll over, and now it's going to tell you how it's going to cook it. It's going to want you to use the temperature probe. And when you use the temperature probe, you're going to insert the probe, and here this is the black clad probe. You're going to insert it so that this is completely covered by the beef. It's all the way in as deeply as possible, right? Now you can change that temperature if you want. Once that's inserted, you can choose a target temperature for how you want your beef to be prepared. In this case, it's 130 degrees, which is roughly a low end of medium rare, somewhere between rare and medium rare. So if you want to move it up, you can change that target temperature a little bit to slow roast it. If you want to go down, you can scroll it down and have it a little bit less done. And then you select that. It's going to tell you that the oven is cooking at 185 degrees. It's going to take 2 hours and 30 minutes. So you know now that if you put your roast in, it'll take exactly 2 hours and 30 minutes to prepare it to the exact temperature that you've asked it to be prepared to. And now if you really want to get fancy, you can go to the very last box, and that's the set an end time. And so let's say I want to serve this in the future. I just touch enter, and now I can adjust the time when I want that roast to be completed. So now I could scroll over. Right now, 2 hours and 30 minutes from now puts it done at 3:40 here in Denver. But let's say I wanted to serve it at 5 o'clock. I could scroll to 5 o'clock. Once that number is in the oven, I hit enter, turn the oven on, and now the oven won't start until the exact moment, so that it'll take 2 hours and 30 minutes for the roast to be done, and it'll be done at exactly 5 o'clock. So you have that chance to set it. You don't have to do anything else. You can just let it slow roast just like that. So there's ways that Gourmet can really help you in terms of how you can program it, set it up just the way you want.
Hey, Ben.
Yes, Lynn.
With the older model, with the knob, how did it get to the gourmet mode?
The gourmet mode is listed in a series of numbers, and it's in the, if I can remember correctly, the old panel. It is called, there's a list of numbers, and if we have that, and if you get that person's name, I can definitely set it. But I think you do push the button, and then you turn it to the different cooking, the different food groups, and then you can choose them from that.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So again, you see in the gourmet mode, you have different modes for cooking. Again, it goes all the way across, again, from meat, poultry, potatoes. They always assume in many cases that when you're cooking poultry, you want it fully cooked. So there really are very few options. They just want you to cook it. Although say for a chicken breast, there's a way to cook it where it's less of a roasting method, and there's another method that is a roasting method. But for a whole chicken or chicken legs, they're always assuming you want to roast it. So it's just going to give you one choice in terms of how you want to cook it. So another interesting feature on the oven is when you look at Gourmet, you might see the word in one of the boxes that the word fresh is there next to a variety of different things. In this case, it's fresh pizza, but there's also things like fresh appetizers or fresh or potatoes, which would assume fresh potatoes, right? In all those cases, that usually means that somewhere else in the oven, there's another program for its frozen counterpart. So if you are really desperate and you have nothing else to eat but a frozen pizza, the convection steam oven can cook your frozen pizza really, really nicely, but you would just go and choose that mode. But in the fresh mode, right, that's for when you want to make your own crust and you want to get that whole thing done. And they're going to give you, again, a couple of methods for cooking a fresh pizza. One is just a straight bake mode, where it's going to just use dry convection air. No steam is going to be involved. But if you want to just bake it like it really is, because what pizza is really flat bread that's going to be topped with something, there's a more gourmet feature which essentially utilizes the combination modes to bake your pizza with a little bit of extra steam. So if you look at that in that more gourmet, again, it's going to always give you the prompt. You don't need to preheat the oven. It's going to tell you where you want to bake in the one level in the oven. Then it's going to tell you, then it's going to ask you a question. How do you want the crust? Do you like your crust medium brown? Do you like it a little bit more? In this case, it's always going to be a medium brown crust. So what does that mean for you when you turn it on? You can't change the temperature, right? The temperature is going to be preset. The steam injection is going to be preset. And it's just going to take exactly 30 minutes to bake that pizza, because the oven is going to determine how much steam and what temperature to bake that pizza at. So the first thing you're now thinking, I hope, is that how does the oven know what temperature and how much steam to add to it? So one of the unique things about this appliance is what we call a sensor-driven appliance, right? Now, some of you might have those fancy microwaves that have a button on it that says sensor reheat, where you just put whatever you want to reheat in your microwave, you hit the sensor reheat button, and supposedly the oven figures out exactly how much is in the bowl or on the plate that you want to reheat, applies enough microwave power to heat it up, and you get a reheated plate of food or dish of food, whatever you're doing, right? My experience has always been with microwaves is that when I do that, the bowl is 20 times hotter than the food. So I'm not really sure that the microwave sensor is figuring out how much food am I reheating, right? Well, the sensor in this oven is a little more sophisticated than that, because one, you're telling it what you're trying to cook, right? So in the case of, say, baking a fresh pizza in the gourmet mode, where we're just telling it, I want to bake fresh pizza and I want it to be medium brown, and it won't let you change the temperature and it won't let you change the mode. How does the oven know what it's doing? So here's how that works and how the sensor is more sophisticated in the convection steam oven than in some of the other appliances that use sensors in the oven. So you tell the oven you want to bake a pizza, right? You tell it that you want it medium brown crust. You put that into the oven, and the oven now needs to take a reading, and the reading it can take most easily is the internal temperature of the oven cavity. So it'll take that temperature, it will then raise the temperature to a prescribed point. It will then use an algorithm to calculate how long it took the oven to raise the temperature from point A to point B. Once it's done that, it's able to approximate the weight and the mass of the pizza that you put into the oven. By doing that, it's then able to calculate how hot does the oven need to be, how much steam am I going to inject, and therefore bake the pizza to a medium brown crust in the 30-minute time frame that you've given it. So that sensor is used extensively in the gourmet feature so that it can take over the cooking for you and give you product that comes out the way you would like it to be. So just remember that when you're using that sensor cooking, right, especially when you're using it in conjunction with the probe, you're going to get really, really precise results of the food that you're baking or roasting, whatever it is you're cooking in the convection steam oven. So using those together really, really adds up to an easy way to cook, right? So those are just some of the things that you can do in that gourmet mode. What I always encourage people to do, because there isn't a list somewhere of every single thing and how it's being prepared in the gourmet mode. It's not printed anywhere. Trust me, I've looked for it. Best thing to do is just explore it one day when you're just scrolling through and seeing all the different things that you can do in there. Some of the things you may never use. You may never cook a hot dog in the convection steam oven. I know I certainly did. You have a question?
Does it measure humidity as well?
It's going to take a relative humidity, and that's just how it's able to input the amount of steam. One of the differences between our oven and some of the other ovens on the market is some of the other ovens on the market allow you to calibrate how much, in terms of a percentage of steam, is actually entered into the cavity. In the Wolf model, we don't actually do that. We never felt that there were people who were, that was going to be a feature that people were going to really avail themselves of a lot. So they weren't going to dial in 10% humidity, 20% humidity. So in this case, the oven does all that for you. But it is always gauging how much moisture there is in the oven, especially when we're talking about baked goods, pizzas, breads, things like that. Okay. So again, good to explore, come in, see how the different ways you can cook. You may try it out and say, you know what, I really don't think that's the way I like to cook my fish fillet, so you may have to develop a new method for cooking it. And again, places to look for new methods for cooking is to look at our Roth Living Lifestyle Instagram page and our YouTube page. We have lots of content there that we're developing all the time, putting recipes on there, so it's a good place to look. And then also steamandbake.com is a great website for recipes that are designed specifically for a convection steam oven, not the Wolf convection steam oven, but all convection steam ovens. So that's really, really helpful. So again, just kind of explore through here. One of some of our favorite things, hard-boiled eggs. I don't know how many times I've had people say to me, what's the best way to hard-boil an egg? I have so many problems with it not being able to peel, or maybe the yolk turns gray, green, and it's just not very, not very appealing. You don't want to make beautiful deviled eggs out of green egg yolks, and unless, of course, you're doing, I guess, a Dr. Seuss party or something like that. But if you want to do hard-boiled eggs, we have a mode for that. Now, you can do up to 32 eggs simultaneously in the convection steam oven, hard-boil them absolutely beautifully. There's a mode for that right here in the Gourmet. It just says eggs, and you only have two choices, soft-cooked and hard-cooked. And all it's going to do is utilize steam. Takes about 20 minutes. What I always recommend is once the eggs have been in the steamer, in the convection steam oven for about those 20 minutes, pop them into a bowl of ice water, just let them chill down completely, store them in your fridge. You're never going to get a green yolk, and they'll also find it very easy to peel. And just remember too, always easier to peel hard-boiled eggs if the eggs were a little older when they went into the steamer. The freshest eggs never peel very well. They need a little bit of time to kind of shrink back from the inside of the shell, but once you hard-boil those eggs, much easier to peel. So just another little tip. So hard cooking eggs, again, is right here in the convection steam oven. And you don't have to do 32, obviously, at a time. You can do one, no problem, without any trouble whatsoever. Okay? So there's just some of the things you can explore in the gourmet features, right? Again, the baked goods is where a lot of people are interested in this oven and what it can do for baked goods. And we're certainly going to talk about bread here extensively in a minute. But you can see there's lots of different modes in baked goods, from standard, just bread, then we have braided bread, which usually means things like challah or a softer brioche style bread, something with a little more fat and sugar into it. So you don't need quite as much steam. You don't want quite as hard a crust. The oven is calibrated for that so that when we bake in that mode, we're actually going to get that soft exterior crust using the braided bread mode. And then if you're going to bake just bread rolls, that's going to be a different technique, say, for baking a full loaf of bread. So maybe not quite as much heat or a little bit less steam. There's a program for that. And then everything from cookies and pastries, baking cakes, quick breads, a sheet cake, a bundt cake, all sorts of different things. If you're just a little unsure of how to adapt a recipe to bake, especially with baking in this oven, there are modes in there that you can just go to, as opposed to having to take your recipe and sort of calibrate it. If you know you've got a bundt cake that you've loved for years and years and you want to bake it in here, just use the bundt cake mode. It's really designed for cooking a nice, heavy, dense cake, just like that. So using the Gourmet, great to explore, to look through all of those different modes, right? So again, with the Gourmet, just you choose what it is you want to cook. and then how you'd like it to be coming out, and just kind of remembering yesterday's session a little bit, knowing that if the mode is going to be convection steam or convection, you're probably going for a little bit of browning or a little bit of texture and color on the outside. So a good example of that might be, say, the roast potato mode in the gourmet feature. When you want to roast those potatoes, it's going to use higher temperatures in the convection steam mode to give you a nice crispy brown potato on the outside. So again, that works really nicely. So let me just scroll back here a little bit, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about how you program your own favorite items, right? So let's just say that you've created a dish. It's a wonderful roasted salmon dish, and it has some, beautiful asparagus, which will come into season here really soon. And you develop that, and you cook it one day in your convection steam oven, and you play with it a little bit. You decide that 370 degrees for 15 minutes for the salmon, and then you add the asparagus for another 7 or 8 minutes, and that gives you exactly the roast that you want. And you really like that program, that works really nicely for you. How do you save that so you don't have to remember it every single time? Well, we have a button on the front of the panel, which is the favorites button, and that allows you to create your own process, and then you can save it in the oven so that you can recall it the next time you want to make it, right? So the easy way to do that is just to remember you need to create that process and then save it. Don't try to hit favorites and make it. You have to start at the beginning. So let's just say with our salmon, we know that we want to roast it, so we're going to go to convection steam mode. We're going to type that in. We're going to do convection steam. We said it was 370 degrees, so we're going to set that temperature at 370. Now we know we want it to start for, it's going to be a total cooking time of, say, 23 minutes, right? So let's go to 23. We'll set our duration to 23 minutes. Right, so now what we've got in here is convection steam mode at 370 degrees for 23 minutes, right? We need to save that. So what we do is, once we've determined how we want it to be programmed, we just touch the favorites button. And what you get is select a storage space. You get a little message that says, please select a storage space, and it'll always default to the first open space, right? So you don't have to find it. It'll always highlight the space that is ready to go. So if you touch enter, it's now going to ask you to enter the name of that dish, whatever you want to do. You can abbreviate it, you can type it all out. I dare say this is the part that takes the longest, is typing in the name, and you're limited to, I think it's 15 characters, so you don't want to get too wordy. But if you just know that it's your favorite salmon dish, you go and you highlight it all, and you type in salmon or roast salmon. We could do that, R-S-T, right? R-S-T, and then you can put a space, type in salmon, press the enter key to check boxes and save it. First question it's going to ask you is, do you want to run this program? You can say yes or no, depending on what your preference is. But once if you hit no, it automatically saves it. So then all you have to do the next time you want to make it is come in, hit the favorites button, and voila, it'll pop up. You can scroll to it, hit enter, and it's automatically going to save it and start the program the way you did it the first time that you liked the most. Question?
We have some folks asking about the older model. Maybe we can schedule like a little breakout session for those who have the older model working with some of these programming.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
You can happily find it. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We can work with you folks with the older model and kind of geared towards you, since some of the processes are a little bit different. So we're hearing you and seeing it. So we'll get you guys all taken care of.
So once you've saved it, it's in there until you change it. And everything is modifiable. If it turns out you don't like that recipe in the future and you want to get rid of it, you can delete it. You can always overwrite those. I think there are 24 open slots when you start. So I'm not sure that many people will fill up all 24, but who knows? I hope they do. But then you can just go ahead and change them if you like. What we like to do here in the showroom a lot is we save cookie recipes, all the different baking techniques that we use for this oven, for the different types of cookies that we like to share with our guests here, so that we didn't have to create a spreadsheet with all the different baking techniques on it. We just program it into the oven so that anybody can just come in and say, oh, I've got some almond clouds I need to bake off, or maybe it's our brown butter chocolate chip cookie. They can just put it in the oven and just bake it off, and it just goes really nicely. And we just save them in the favorites. So it is a nice way for saving something that you know you're going to repeat and make again. So create your own little gourmet section for yourself. So that's how you do favorites. But there's another button on here that is, honestly, it's my favorite button because I really think it's where you start to see some really, really cool stuff in the oven. And that's down here on this bottom row, and that's the More button. And the More button is funny because it's one of those things that I think they wanted to write all the different things that the oven could do, but they couldn't figure out how to put it on the front of the oven, so they had to just come up with a word that just said, okay, go here and you'll find more stuff. And so they just put More. And in the More button, we have all sorts of different things. There's another recipe file there. So if you want to create more recipes and save your own ideas, you have it there as well. There's More Gourmet. So just like the Gourmet button on the front of the oven panel, there's more of those processes in More Gourmet. Again, it's more of those ideas that the oven is doing a lot of the work for you, taking the guesswork out of it for you, predetermined processes that are in that More category. And in More Gourmet, what we have are things like fresh appetizers. Right next to the fresh appetizers are frozen appetizers. Next to the frozen appetizers, we have a souffle mode. I think somebody asked us about baking a souffle yesterday in the convection steam oven. Well, there's a mode for it. And as I said, in the convection steam oven, what it's going to ask you is, how do you want the top of your souffle? Would you like it to be lightly brown? Okay, so yes, it does. So now it says, use rack position 2. You're only going to bake 1 tray of souffles. And then it's going to tell you it's not going to set. It's not going to allow you to change the temperature. It's just going to tell you it's going to take 46 minutes to bake that souffle. Right? So more than likely, that's going to be for a souffle that's a little denser, something like a cheese souffle or a seafood souffle, something along those lines, less for like a dessert souffle. But it will not ruin your oven by blowing your souffle all over the front of the oven. So again, and then next to that souffle button, frozen potatoes. Because as I said, in the Gourmet, there was the potato button for just roasting potatoes, baking a potato, making a potato gratin, steaming potatoes, something like that. But the frozen potatoes is a good example of, again, how the sensor works. So many times we need to make some frozen potatoes. Maybe we're making a hash brown casserole or something like that, and we don't have time to make our own hash browns on our Wolf infrared griddle. So we're going to get some frozen hash browns in our convection steam oven, and we must want to use the frozen ones. And this is how the sensor works for those frozen products, right? What you'll do is you just type it, and it just gives you 3 choices. It says packaging information. So if you have a container or a bag of frozen hash brown potatoes, you read the bag, and the bag will usually say bake at X for X amount of time, right? Obviously, all this needs to know is the amount of time that the package recommends that you cook those potatoes. Put the potatoes on the tray, find the corresponding number to the amount of time that the package recommends that you bake or roast, whatever you want to say. So 1, 2, or 3, each one is a varied length of time. And so you would choose the corresponding, hit enter, insert the potatoes, close the oven, and off you go. The oven is making the assumption, A, it's a potato, so you probably want it to be nice and brown and crispy, and B, that it's frozen. It knows those 2 things. And now you've told it how much time the package told you to cook it. It will determine temperature, it will determine mode, and it'll give you a rough estimate once it's calibrated itself, how long it will take to prepare those potatoes. So you can literally just insert them, hit the corresponding number, and off you go. You don't have to set temperature, you don't have to set time, you just tell it what it wants to do. The same thing is going to be true for frozen pizza and frozen appetizers. It's going to make those assumptions that you want to bake it to a nice crispy golden brown, and it's frozen, and it's that particular product. The oven will then calibrate everything else, temperature, steam content, and the time, and do that deciding for you. So again, in that More Gourmet, there's all of those wonderful choices. Again, you want to bake a pie, there's a method here for baking pies. Muffins, another thing that they didn't, for some reason, didn't put it in the baked goods, they put it in muffins, but they made it their own. So down here in More Gourmet, again, there's more places that you can explore and do different methods of cooking. If you're a little unsure of yourself, or you're not sure how to retool your recipe for the convection steam oven, and it matches one of these categories like pie or muffins or things like that, the oven will do that choosing for you. All right? So Before we get to bread, let's just go through some of these other things. Again, here's that slow roast mode that I sort of alluded to a little bit before when we talked about the different modes for cooking meat in the convection steam oven. Slow roast mode is the most precise mode that you can use for doing your different meat roasts, whether it be beef, pork, lamb, veal, whatever you like. In slow roast mode, you just have to be able to tell it what type of meat you want to cook, how you want the meat to be cooked internally, and when you would like to serve it, right? And as I kind of showed you before, once you've chosen that piece of meat, and in this case, let's look at, say, that leg of lamb, right? We'll look at the leg of lamb here. First question it's gonna ask you is, how do you want that cooked internally, right? Do you want it rare? Would you like it medium? It'll initially just give you two choices. Let's just choose medium. It's gonna first then tell you rack position 2. As always with the oven, it's always gonna tell you which rack to bake in or roast in. So now it's telling you that the probe temperature for medium lamb is 155 degrees. Perhaps you know you'd like it a little bit less done than that. Again, you can modify that by touching on that part of the probe and then scrolling down to put a target temperature of, let's just say 148. Okay, you've chosen 148. Now you'll notice that the next box, which is the temperature box, is blank. You cannot adjust that. But what you can adjust is how long it takes to roast that leg of lamb to that degree of doneness that you would choose. The range is 2 hours and 30 minutes or to 4 hours and 30 minutes. Any period of time that falls within that range can be selected for roasting that lamb. So if you're running out of a little bit short of time and you want to do it quickly, you can set it at 2 hours and 30 minutes. If you have the luxury of being able to cook it a little bit longer and you're not going to need the oven for anything else during that period of time, then you perhaps could cook it a little slower and take 4 hours and 30 minutes. Regardless of that, you can then just program it to meet the end time that you would like to serve that leg of lamb. So let's just choose that default of 3 hours and 30 minutes. So if I chose that right now, my lamb would be done at 5:03 p.m. here in Denver, right? If that seems like it's too soon for me to want to serve it, I can adjust that end time. Say I just move it up to, well, let's just say 6 o'clock, just by hitting this little thing. So once I've typed that in, now, once I've inserted the probe into that leg of lamb, placed the lamb into the oven will start automatically, right, to have the lamb done again at exactly 6 o'clock this evening. The other beauty of the oven is that you don't have to worry about resting the lamb once it's come out of the oven. It will be rested for you. So literally upon taking the lamb out of the oven, you can put it right onto your serving piece or your cutting board, slice it and serve it without worrying about having all the beautiful juices from that lamb run out all over your serving piece or your cutting board and making a giant mess and losing all the beautiful flavor and moisture there. So you don't have to worry about resting it. Now, let's just say you had planned for 6 o'clock, but some of your guests are delayed, can't get there right on time, or you're having such a nice time, you know, with having your cocktails and your appetizers that, you run a little bit beyond when you wanted to eat at 6 o'clock and it's not until 6:30. Not to fear, leave the lamb in the oven with the probe inserted. Just turn it off. The lamb will be held at the internal temperature that you set it to indefinitely until you're ready to serve it without overcooking it or drying it out. It'll just hold beautifully in the oven, just like that. Because remember, like I said yesterday, this was a technology that was designed to cook large quantities of meat primarily, slowly, and then hold them for prolonged periods of time so we in the restaurant and the hotel industry could then serve them when we needed to at a banquet or a large function. So that's what this technology was designed for. So it will hold your leg of lamb as long as you leave it in the oven with that probe attached. You'll be able to read that internal temperature the whole time. So again, slow roast. They haven't developed a slow roast feature yet for poultry. I think they're working on it, but we'll have to see if that ever comes out because poultry obviously is a little bit different. They don't want you to be holding poultry at temperatures that are slightly incorrect and all that kind of stuff. So they're still working on the whole poultry slow roasting. But generally speaking, you don't really need it for that because you don't worry about an internal temperature as much as opposed to just getting it to that safe temperature. So again, in that slow roast feature is there. Make it available to you. It's a wonderful feature for roasting all of your meats and roasts and things like that. So, okay. So one of the things I mentioned yesterday when we talked about reheat mode in the oven is that there is an auto reheat mode, which again is in the more button. And this is for when you want to reheat a particular item in a very specific way. In other words, you have a bowl of mashed potatoes that you'd like to reheat. Well, you obviously don't want crispy mashed potatoes at this point. You'd like them to be nice and moist and hot and creamy. So you get a choice in your auto reheat mode between moist and crispy. Moist, obviously a little bit more steam is involved. It may take a little bit longer, depending on the density of that. But again, you're saying to the oven, I want to reheat whatever it is I have. I want it to be moist. Again, the oven is going to use the sensor to calculate the volume of food that you've put into the oven. It's then able to adjust steam quantities and temperature to reheat that item so that you get a nice hot dish. If I don't want it to be moist, but I want it to be crispy, say I have a slice of pie or chicken pot pie, or I have some leftover egg roll, something that I really want it to be crispy on the inside, we use the crispy mode. Again, a little bit less steam. We're still using steam, however, to rehydrate and make that item, you know, more palatable again and refresh it a little bit. We put that in there. It uses a little bit less steam, a little higher temperature in order to crisp up the outside of what it is that we're cooking. So again, this is a great reheat mode. Again, using the sensor for when you have a very particular outcome that you're looking for and not just make it hot, right? Just giving it certain textures and things like that. So again, auto reheat is here in the more button, right? And then some of the buttons that you probably won't get used as much, but they definitely want to make them that they're known to you in here. We have the spa button. I've never met anybody yet who said they're going to use the spa button, but it is here. So if you want to warm up some towels, we do that frequently. We'll take some beautiful towels, we'll dip them in some water, maybe with you can put a little essential oil in there so they smell nice, and then you can put them into your convection steam oven and get them nice and hot. Give your guests steam towels or something like that. Maybe you're having ribs one day and you want to clean your hands with something really nice. You can heat up your towels in the oven. Just want to make sure that you've already wet the towels down a little bit before you put them in the oven. There won't be enough steam to wet the towel all the way through if you just use the oven. So they need to be wet a little bit before they go into the oven, right? And then there's things like hot wraps if you want to put, like if you're in a barber shop and you want to put it on your face, that kind of thing. Hot stones for a massage, and then you can do all sorts of different things in here. So a lot of this stuff, I have no idea what it is. Like, I don't know what cherry stone or grapeseed cushions are. If somebody knows out there, please enlighten me. I have no idea. But those are in here as well, and they're built in for you. And then there is a mode, however, in here that I use all the time, and that's the Sanitize mode. And now it sounds a little like you're working in a hospital and you're sterilizing things and all that kind of stuff. But what it really is for food preservation. So if any of you are out there, if you are gardeners and you do a lot of preserving at the end of the summer and you're putting up your tomatoes, or you're making jams and jellies, or you're making mustard and all different things, the Sanitize feature in here saves you an enormous amount of time, and also a few less scalds on your fingers from dipping your hands with the tongs to pull the jars out of a big pot of boiling water. And so in Sanitize mode, we have three choices. We can do baby bottles for anybody who has infants in their lives, or maybe they have grandchildren or something like that. They want to sterilize some baby bottles. There's a mode for that. You can put the clean bottles in there and then sanitize them so you know that they're super clean. But then the other ones we have are preparing jam jars, and that's just for getting ready to do some canning. So what I like to do when I do it is I put my jars in here. I get them nice and hot and clean. I just leave them in the oven until whatever's ready to be jarred is ready to go. Then I take it out, put it in, and then I scroll over one more, and now I preserve the jam. Now with a small jar like this, let me just show you, I have these little 4-ounce jelly jars that we do here in the showroom. I can do about 24 of these simultaneously on the perforated tray in the oven. It takes about half an hour, but I've never had a seal break after I've done it, and I've done hundreds of these jars. And so it works really, really nicely, saves you all the hassle of kind of dunking in and out of the boiling pot of water. And unless you have a huge pot, you can only do a limited number at once. But this, being able to do 24 at once of the small ones is easy. And then if you've got larger jars, obviously they'll be correspondingly fewer, but you can still do it very, very easily. So for those of you who really enjoy preserves and doing like that, this is a real time saver, super easy to clean up, which we'll talk about here in a second. But just remember that that sanitize feature is there, and I would recommend that if you are into that kind of stuff, you use it because it really is a wonderful feature. So a couple other features that are built in down here by Sanitize is our warming oven feature, right? All the Wolf ovens have that warm feature, including the convection steam oven. So when you want to hold something nice and warm, the advantage of this oven is, again, steam. And the steam is helping stay moist, right? You're going to have that steam injected into the cavity. You're holding a casserole, whatever it might be. You want to hold it warm until your guests arrive or you're ready to serve it. The warm feature is here for you. Again, you just type it. It tells you to use. You can use rack position 2 if you just have one tray. But if you want a couple of trays to hold warm, you can use racks 1 and 3 and then hold a little bit more in there as a warming oven. And again, it allows you to set the temperature. It defaults to 176 degrees, but the range of temperatures for holding warm is between 160 and 190. So again, if you want to just have something that's very delicate and you don't want it to get overcooked, you might want to hold it at the low end of that spectrum, or you can move it up if it's a little heartier and you want to keep it a little hotter up to 190, but that's a safe holding temperature. You're not having to worry about any growth or bacteria or anything like that in that temperature range. And also because it's 190 at the max, it's very unlikely to dry food out at that temperature. So it's a great holding range. And you can set it up to, I believe it's 90 minutes. Yes, 90 minutes is what they really want you. They don't want you holding food for longer than 90 minutes. Just from a food safety point of view, you don't want to leave food in there for a long time. Lynn.
The older model has the sanitation.
It does.
Well.
It has a different name. Instead of sanitize, it's like cleanse or cleaning or something like that. But it's the same series of programs. It's baby bottles, prep jam jars, and preserve jam. But it's just got a different name. I think it was cleanse or something along that line. So those are all those items that we have in the more button. Again, great place to explore. Look for some of those things in there. You'll find them just again on that secondary level right there as well. So let's talk a little bit about the last button on here, which is the auto steam bake method. It used to be called, in the old model, was like gourmet bake, was one of the ways that they used to call auto steam bake. But auto steam bake helps us crack into this idea of baking bread in the convection steam oven. We all know that commercial bakeries exclusively use some form of steam injection in their oven in order to bake the bread that you might get at a Whole Foods or at the small French bakery down the street. They're all using a certain amount of steam in order to create that crust, in order to create that shine and the beautiful flavor that you get from when you bake bread utilizing steam. Now, there's lots of ways to utilize the steam in the oven, and there's going to be those of you out there who are very, very serious bakers, and you've been doing it for years and years and years, and you have methods that are tried and true that are, for your regular wall oven, or perhaps you're using the Dutch oven method where you're putting a large heavy cast iron or stainless steel Dutch oven in a very, very hot oven and then baking the loaf of bread in there. Certainly that's going to give you an outstanding quality product. But one of the nice things about the convection steam oven is that when you tell it you want to bake bread, it really is calibrated to making that bread look just as beautiful as you possibly can, with the least amount of work, right? So for those of you who may be just coming on to this adventure of baking your own bread, maybe you're a little intimidated by some of the websites you've seen out there where they're telling you that, you need to, your starter takes 2 weeks to mature, and then you've got to feed it every single day and keep that going and all that kind of stuff. And then the bread needs to be baked in very different ways, and you're putting all sorts of paraphernalia in the bottom of your oven to create steam, to create a retention of heat, but you're using bake stones, you're using cast iron. So there's lots of different things out there. And maybe for you, that's just a little bit like, maybe that's not what I want to do, but I'd really like to make bread. Well, you're in luck, because if you have a convection steam oven, then we can get you to that point really, really easily. And so you're going to feel like look at my beautiful loaf of bread, and I work for 15 minutes. So that really makes it really, really nice. So auto steam bake, again, is one of those ways where the oven makes a lot of decisions for you as long as you tell it exactly what you're trying to do. In this case, when we choose that auto steam bake function, we get bread, braided bread, puff pastry, and then just proofing dough. If we want to just use the oven as a proofer, that's where the function is for that. If we want to create that beautiful 90-degree humid environment, we hit the proof mode, uses steam, keeps the temperature down, and we can proof our loaf really, really nicely in that nice moist environment. But if we want to bake, we want to use the auto steam bake is just one way to bake. And how the oven does that? Again, when you choose it for baking bread, it's going to tell you you can bake it in rack position 2, or 1 and 3, depending on how large your loaves are. But look what it's telling you when you go to the next screen. It's telling you the only thing you can change is the temperature setting, right? 410 degrees. That's what it's telling you is the temperature setting. You could change that but you have the window between the bottom and the top, but depending on how hot and how much color you want on the outside of your loaf, you can then scale up or scale it down, depending on what you like. But in auto steam bake, again, you've told the oven you want to bake bread. It's going to make that assumption that you want steam to create a crust, so it's going to make those decisions for you. That's just one way that you can bake bread, right? And it sets duration and all that kind of good stuff, all right? So let's scroll back a little bit. So let me just give you a couple other ways that you can do bread in the oven, because there's lots of choices. Those are going to be in the gourmet section. And if you go gourmet to baked goods and you select bread, you have basically 4 choices with bread. Auto steam bake we just talked about. There's just a standard baking method, which is just using convection steam, right? Just the convection steam function, right? With your choice of temperature, and then you choose the time. Or if you are very precise and you want to use your probe, you can use the probe to gauge the internal temperature of the bread. If you know that your bread is ideally done at 201 degrees internal temperature, you can set it for that, right? So you can use bake mode. Again, it's using convection steam, which means there's steam constantly injected into the oven, but you're not telling it specifically that you're baking bread. You're just using the convection steam mode, because maybe that works best for that particular loaf that you might have. But my favorite one is the more gourmet setting for baking bread, because that gives you the most automatic transmission. For people who are just coming to this experience of baking their own bread, this is probably the best place to start. You choose more gourmet. It tells you don't preheat the oven. Now, for so many bread recipes, it says you need to introduce it into a very hot oven so that you can get that beautiful oven spring, and you get all of those things that the heat on initial contact with that loaf are going to create. But don't worry, the oven knows what it's doing. So if you put that loaf of bread, once you've risen it, and we'll talk about that in my recipe in a second, but when you put that in there, the oven is then going to automatically inject steam. Again, it's starting to bake it very quickly. The steam is starting to create that first envelope of water on the outside of the loaf. So you don't have to preheat the oven. They're now saying just bake it on one level. So in other words, just one rack of bread. I have baked 2 loaves simultaneously, 2 500 to 750 gram loaves. I've done them simultaneously in the oven with fairly good success. I really haven't noticed that there's been a huge difference between those 2 loaves if you just do that one tray with 2 fairly sizable loaves. You could make maybe smaller loaves on that one, but you want to just do one tray at a time. Question?
I think we had chatted earlier that on the older model, the auto steam is called gourmet.
Gourmet, yeah, gourmet bake.
So gourmet bake
Yes,
on the older
model.
All right, perfect.
So again, one level. So now it's just going to ask you one question, right? It's going to ask you, how do you like the crust of your bread? You have 3 choices. Medium brown is the default, so it's just kind of a light medium brown. On either side, you have a light brown, so a softer crust, a little bit less crunchy, a little bit less substantial. And then on the other side, you have the well-browned choice. And again, you're just telling it how you like the bread to look when you're done, right? So in this case, let's choose well-browned. So now again, you can't change the temperature. The time is preset at 44 minutes, and the oven will take over and do everything for you. Again, remember the sensor. You've told it you want to bake bread. You want the bread to be medium, to be well browned. The oven will make all the decisions. It will figure out just how much mass you've put into the oven. So if you put 2 loaves, could change versus 1 loaf. And then it will calibrate temperature, quantity of steam, and then eventually it'll come out. Once it's done that determination, it'll give you an estimate of how long it's going to take. Generally speaking, I found that using this mode for baking a loaf of bread takes somewhere between 45 and 50 minutes, give or take. Just depends on how dense and how big that loaf is. But the oven is able to calibrate that for you. When you use this mode, right, you can come out with a really spectacular looking loaf. So I don't know if you can see this really well, but this was a loaf I just baked today, right? Baked this up this morning, did the fabrication of the dough yesterday before I went home. So it just bakes it up really beautifully, gives you a nice golden crust all the way around, nice hollow sound from the baking underneath, but you can hear the crispiness. I hope you can hear that, the crispiness of the loaf, but it really does create a beautiful loaf of bread, just like that. And you can see that it's a really, really easy thing to come away with. And in a second here, we will go through just putting the dough together so you can just see how easy that is, because we can literally do it in less than 5 minutes. So, Lynn, are there any questions about what we've covered up to this point that we should answer before we go on to the really exciting stuff, which is cleaning?
We have, I think we're good right now.
Great.
We can pop into cleaning, and then
Right.
when we need, I'll get up there and get
And we'll
in close.
rotate the camera and we'll just do a little bit more.
Perfect.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about cleaning. So first thing, most important when you're cleaning the oven, most of you probably, or if you're looking into getting one of these ovens, are going to mount it at approximately this height, maybe slightly lower. I wouldn't recommend it to be much higher than this, which I believe is 66 inches to the top of the oven from the floor here. So somewhere between 62 and 66 inches for the top of the oven to the floor is usually fairly ideal. Underneath the counter, we don't recommend it only because when you open the oven door, if it's underneath the counter, you might get a face full of steam. And obviously if you have younger children in the house, they might get a really nasty face full of steam. It's not that the steam is that dangerous when it's dissipating out of the oven, but probably not the most pleasant experience. So we generally mount them at this height. Another
Real
question.
quick, Chuck was wondering where you can get yeast nowadays.
Well, it depends on what kind of yeast we're talking about. I mean, there are fresh yeast, like a cake yeast, which is the hardest to find. Usually those are only found through bakery supply houses because it's used in a lot of commercial bakeries. But what this recipe will call for is what we call instant yeast, which should be available at any supermarket, but you want to find that instant yeast as opposed to what we call active dry yeast. And I'll explain why we do that when we put the recipe together, but that is not a problem. You should be able to find good quality yeast. Just remembering that if you're going to buy yeast, I generally store it in the refrigerator. It extends the shelf life much longer because yeast is obviously a living thing, and if you leave it too long, eventually it dies, and then your bread will never rise. So, so back to the starting on the cleaning talk. The oven is usually mounted at this height, which for someone of my height, and I'm about 5'9", if I open the oven door and I want to try to clean it with the oven door opening, I can barely reach the back of the oven in order to clean it effectively, right? So those very bright engineers figured out a way to come around that where we can remove the oven door. Now, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but I'm going to go through it again. So if you have any questions about taking your oven door off, and this is also true for the older model as well, the hinges are exactly the same. So the doors can both be removed in exactly the way, regardless of what generation of oven that you have. So Lynn's going to move the camera, so hopefully nobody gets seasick while we're moving over here. So again, you can see here are these two hinges located at either corner of the bottom of the door. You see there's two little clips. You want to flip those clips forward so that they're completely pointing straight at you, just like that, right? They should be all the way forward, right? Now take the door and lift it basically like one stop. It's going to stop by itself right here at about a 45-degree angle from the front of the oven. Once it's at this point, just grasp it firmly in the sides, lift up and then out, and the door is easily removed from the oven. All right, so you can see that it comes off really nicely. Very easy to move. It's heavy, but not completely ungainly. So we're just going to set this to the side. Just like that. Okay, great. All right.
All right, I'll put this back.
All right.
And
Tell me what we need. All right. There I am again. I can see myself. Wonderful.
sorry,
All right.
guys.
That looks good. Okay. So now, obviously, much easier to reach the back of the oven, right? I can touch the back of the oven wall. I can clean it very easily. One of the other downsides of mounting this underneath a counter would be you have to literally get down on all fours in order to clean the ceiling of the oven. Remember, there's no self-cleaning feature on the oven, but it's constantly cleaning itself through the use of steam. Whenever we're using steam in the oven, it cleans the oven. So if I'm just going to do a basic cleaning, best way to do it is just run the oven, pure steam at 210 degrees for anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. Just let the oven run a nice steam cycle, nothing inside of it. Just let that steam build up and wash down the walls. Then grab yourself a nice clean kitchen towel and wipe it out. Just wipe out that excess water, and that'll give you a kind of basic cleaning. It's not going to get any grease buildup that may have been there for a few weeks or something like that, but it's going to get the oven clean perfunctorily. And if you just let it, if you do that every time you use the oven, it'll stay relatively clean without too much elbow grease. All right. So these racks are easily removed. Just take these little thumb screws and unscrew them. This comes out, the rack, the side racks, dishwasher. Just run these through the dishwasher, just like your other pots, trays that you get with the oven, they can go through the dishwasher as well. Now you can easily clean. There's no other removable parts in the oven, right? Just the two side racks are the only two removable parts in the oven. Then you can wipe it down without having to get your fingers entangled in the racks and clean it really, really nicely. So that's just if you use a steam and you've just kind of done a simple cleaning. But let's say you get a little grease buildup. You've done a lot of entertaining that week. You've done a lot of roasting. Maybe you did some ribs. You did a couple of chickens, did something else. And you get a lot of grease building up in the oven and you're thinking, it's taking on a sort of coppery golden patina to the inside of the oven. It's no longer silver. It's starting to look, you know, a little bit like a penny or something like that. And so you're a little worried about how to get that off. I am not a big proponent. However, some of my counterparts in some of the other showrooms, they like to use a no fume oven spray. I'm not really wild about those things. I don't really trust them very much. They're also very caustic, so you have to kind of glove up and do all that kind of stuff in order to clean the oven. So what I do when I need to clean the oven and I want to get it looking brand new is I just use the Bon Ami cleanser and a blue Scotch-Brite scouring pad, both the sponge and the scouring side. Little bit of water in here, some of this, and just scrub it down all the way to the back. Just get all the little nooks and crannies. This will take the grease off without damaging and harming your stainless steel, so you don't have to worry about damaging and the appearance of the inside of your oven. And just scrub that down really well, rinse it. You can get the sealing really nicely, and your oven's going to look brand new. Lynn can probably attest, and all of our other showroom consultants would attest that, you know, we use the convection steam oven upstairs in the culinary center. I probably use that 12, 15 times a week to do different preparations, whether it's baking, roasting, all sorts of different things. And this is all I ever do to maintain it. And it literally looks like it was installed just a couple weeks ago. It's really, really easy to maintain. So just scrubbing it out with that without spraying anything on the inside, I think it's a little bit better. Remember too, is that a lot of the air that's being circulated in the oven and the steam, right, is coming in through these vents and ports in the back of the oven, right? If I'm spraying chemicals in there and they're getting in on the fan and in on that componentry, I dare say I'm afraid that I'm going to be cooking something, you know, like a roast chicken. It's going to get a little bit of easy off on it, and I don't think that's really a great seasoning for that. So I try to avoid spraying anything in there. If you really must clean really, really deeply, there's about 4 little star-headed screws in this back wall of the panel. You can take those out if you're really handy that way. And then if you want to clean behind it, and you can run that panel from the back, you can run that through the dishwasher as well if you want to take it one step further, right? So again, very easy to clean from that respect. Just to kind of recap it, just run your steam cycle after you've used it for, you know, anywhere 10 to 30 minutes or 20 to 30 minutes. Wipe it out for just perfunctory cleaning. But if you want to go a little bit deeper, I recommend the Bon Ami and the Blue Scotch-Brite. Take the door off. It'll keep it nice and shiny and bright. And it's really, really easy to maintain. I dare say it's easier to maintain than your bigger oven because it doesn't take 4 hours to clean it. It takes about 15 minutes to get that clean. So the only other maintenance that you'll need to do for your oven, right, will be to occasionally descale the water system in the oven. Now here in Colorado, our water is not exceedingly hard unless you live perhaps out on well water, outside of a municipality where you might have a little bit harder water. Remember when you get the oven set up that you're going to get a test kit that's going to allow you to test the water hardness in your particular home, and then you can adjust the hardness settings in the oven and therefore calibrate it so that it's matching your water hardness. But there eventually is going to be a need to descale that internal system. So the only one that you should use is this Durval. It's specifically designed for convection steam oven descaling. Again, I use my oven 12, 15 times a week. And in the first year and 4 months, I descaled it once. So I use it a lot. Descaling is basically going to be based on those two factors: use, water hardness. If the water hardness is set, the more you use it, the more likely you are going to have to descale it. But again, it's only once for our oven here in the showroom. And so it's not going to be a thing you're going to have to worry about too often. And the oven will tell you when it's time to be descaled. It'll just give you a little message. You pour that into the reservoir, run it through, rinse it a couple times. Simple as that. You don't have to do anything more than that. It'll do all the work for you. And that's really all the maintenance you have for working with this oven. Again, the cleaning and the descaling annually. So I hope that gives anybody who's had questions about cleaning the oven, give them the answer they need. Just one thing, if I didn't mention it yesterday, I want to make sure I mention this thing. Don't run your reservoir through your dishwasher because especially with this stainless steel panel on the front, you're going to discolor the heck out of it if you run it through the dishwasher. So just wash it, like I said, in the sink, inside and out, and that will keep it nicely maintained. Do you have a question there, Lynn?
I do. Would there ever be a reason to descale if the oven's not asking for it? If it's just kind of working on its own? No. It'll let you know.
It'll let you know. Yep. The oven will know when there's enough buildup of any kind of scale in the lines that it needs to be taken care of. If there isn't, because your water is super, super low mineral and it's very, very clean, then it's never going to need it, and the oven will remind you when you need it.
How about with reverse osmosis?
Right. So again, because there's very, very low mineral content, like almost no mineral content in the reverse osmosis water, if that's the test that you do to set your water hardness setting on your oven from the beginning, then that low setting will then dictate how often it need be descaled in conjunction with the buildup that the sensors find. And so then you can do this based on that. But the RO water should take even less. But again, remember, those of you with the RO system, a little bit of Perrier in your water, like a tablespoon when you fill the tank, just so you have some minerals in the water just to activate the sensor. Because remember that if we're in the middle of a process here, we're steaming, something that's going to take a little bit of extra time, we run out of water. If we have an RO system and there's no minerals in the water that are in the tank, right? The sensors in the boiler will never activate, telling you that the oven is out of water. And if the oven tries to make steam when there's no water, we can damage the internal componentry. So if you have an RO system, when you fill the tank to do your baking, roasting, steaming, whatever it might be, just put a tablespoon of Perrier in the water with it. That's enough mineral content that will activate the sensors.
If it needs to be descaled, will it prevent you from cooking?
Yes. No, it won't. It'll just tell you need to descale it until you up and descale.
Is there a way to override it, or?
I think you can literally just, I've had it where it's been descaled, but I've had to use it, and I just start it through my quick start menu, and it'll ask you, do you want to cancel descaling? And you just say yes, and then it allows you to keep cooking. But every time you turn it back on, it's going to ask you to descale it until you do.
Perfect.
But you can just go into that quick start or the gourmet menu and then start.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to move the camera around. I'm going to give you a quick little talk about how I start the bread, and then we'll answer any more questions that you have, so you can see how quickly and easily this bread comes together. So we're just going to move this around, so bear with us for just a second, and we will get that going. And while we're doing this, I should mention, for those of you who were in our event yesterday and you got to see the porcelain enamel solid baking pan or roasting pan that we can get you for the convection steam oven, just know that we are running about 2 to 3 weeks now on getting those to you, with just ordering them through the warehouse and through the manufacturer. So just bear with us. But if you want to get on a list that you would like to get one of those pans, just email us and we'll get you on a list and get those pans to you just as soon as we possibly can. So much, I mean, about what baking bread is, all this stuff. We get the romance of making our own sourdough starter and all those things. And trust me, that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And if you can do that, more power to you. But again, we'd like to maybe come up with something that's similar to that without maybe putting quite as much effort into it. And so this recipe is an adaptation from a recipe that you're probably all familiar with. You probably read about the no-knead bread that was published in the New York Times a number of years ago, where you could literally just stir together the ingredients, let the dough sit for either overnight or longer in many cases, and then make a loaf of bread that was pretty darn close to something that may have taken somebody else a lot more time to make. So I just want to show you how quickly you can put this dough together, and then you can let it sit minimum of overnight. But if you really want to, and you want to really improve the flavor and give it much more of that really authentic sourdough flavor, is let it sit in your refrigerator covered for 3 or 4 days before you take it out, shape it, and then bake it. So very simple to do. We're going to start with just some regular all-purpose flour right there. And then I use about 1/3 as much whole wheat flour. We've got just a little bit of iodized salt or fine sea salt. Either one. Don't use kosher salt, but just use a fine salt, either iodized or sea salt. And now we're using that the instant yeast, right? And this is all weighed out. So just as really important to note is that all the ingredients in this recipe are weighed out on a kitchen scale. It's really an essential tool in the kitchen. I mean, especially if you're a baker and you really want to nail down the accuracy of your recipes, using a scale, whether you're using grams or imperial weight, remember that a kitchen scale is really going to make your baking much more consistent, right? So scaled everything in there. I'm just going to take a whisk and I'm going to stir that all together so that all those ingredients are nicely blended together. Just this is the only time you want to use the whisk for this. And just blend that together so the yeast, the salt, and both flours are nicely blended. Now, if you don't want to use whole wheat flour, you just want to make a little lighter loaf, you can. You could use a little rye flour in here as well for some flavor, whatever you'd like. But again, this recipe is going to come to you. It's going to be measured in grams. So just dividing it up, and you can just, so it all totals that a certain amount of weight to the ratio of liquid will give you a consistent loaf. So now, the 3 liquids we're adding to this to sort of create a faux sourdough, if you will. We're going to use water. We're going to use a little bit of beer, and then we're going to use a small amount of distilled white vinegar. Now, for the white vinegar, I like to use, I don't know if you guys have known this, what's out there, but there's what they call cleaning vinegar, which is out there in the supermarket. And all that is a distilled white vinegar with a slightly higher acidity level. So a little more oomph to it, right? A little more flavor. So I like to use that because I think it gives my bread a little more flavor and a little nice yeast. Gives the smell, makes it a really nice smell too. So I like to use that vinegar as well. So we're just going to add all 3 of these to the bowl. We've got our water, the beer, And with the beer, lighter beers, I mean, I'm a snob about beer, so I'm not putting Coors Light. No offense to the people who love Coors Light, but I don't put Coors Light in my bread. So if you find a beer that you really like to drink, you can use a little bit of that. And then we're going to use a rubber spatula to just stir it together. We just want to create a sort of shaggy looking loaf. It won't look like bread dough. It's just going to look like a shaggy dough, just where you're getting everything sort of nicely hydrated, so it's mixed together. You can see this will take probably, oh, I don't know, 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most. Just get it so you don't see any basically unincorporated flour in the bowl, right? So just push it together so it just kind of looks like that. I hope you can kind of see it in there on the video, but we just get it in there. Just scrape this off, so you know we don't like to waste it. Now, if I were choosing to bake this loaf of bread tomorrow, I would, whoop, that's loud, cover that. Just want to cover it with some plastic wrap and then set it not in the warmest place in your kitchen, but don't set it under a drafty window or something like that. Just set it in a place where the temperature in the kitchen is going to be rather consistent, and just let it sit overnight. And then the following day, you will shape it into the style of loaf that you would like to make. I like to use these baskets for shaping my bread. I just shape it in here. I cover it with a paper, a linen towel, which has been wet down just a little bit, and then let it rise until when I put my finger in it, the indentation from my finger stays down, and then it's ready to bake in my convection steam oven using whatever mode I might choose. And I just turn it right out of the basket, slash the top with a razor blade or a very sharp knife, and then bake the bread on whatever mode I would choose. But if you would like to develop even more flavor with your bread, take the loaf, the bread, when it's like this, and instead of leaving it on your counter overnight, put it into your refrigerator and let it sit there. You could literally let it sit there for up to about a week and let it develop that slow fermenting flavor for shaping loaf. Then bring it out the night before you want to bake it. Let it sit on your counter overnight so it sort of activates again, starts to rise again. Shape it, bake it, and you're good to go. And then you can get a loaf a lot like this. And I just thought I should show you guys too. Thought this would be kind of interesting for you. I used 2 different modes for baking 2 different loaves of bread. This loaf, the one that I showed you originally, baked in that more gourmet mode, where we're just setting the exterior of the color. That's how we're determining how we want to bake the bread. The other loaf, I thought, well, I'll just bake the same exact loaf of bread, but I baked it on just convection steam, just using about 400 degree temperature, pure convection steam. You can see that there isn't as much shine to the outside of the loaf. It's a little more dull on the outside. Still has a nice crispy sound to the crust, but you don't get that beautiful shine because of the way that the steam is injected into the oven. So it'll work really nicely to bake a loaf of bread, but it's not going to be quite as sexy as the loaf that comes out of that auto steam bake mode or out of the more gourmet mode. So I just thought you might find that interesting. If you look at them side by side, they're a little bit different in terms of how they look, but still going to taste great on both cases. So anyway, all right. So I hope that's helpful. We'll send out the recipe for the bread. The beautiful thing about the bread is you can scale up this recipe. Just, you want to make 2 loaves, go to 1,000. If you want to go to 3 loaves, go to 1,500 grams. If you want to do 4 loaves, make 2,000 grams of flour as your baseline, and then just everything can be calculated from that. It's very easy when we use the metric system to scale up our loaves and make our bread in greater abundance, should we choose to. So Lynn's going to check for some more questions, and we'll be happy to answer them for you, whether it's now or a little bit after. We can take your questions live, and I can answer over the chat if you'd like. But if anybody has any more questions, remember that my email address will be attached to the recipes that we send out, that Lynn and Selena will be sending out to you later today. My email is there. Please feel free to reach out with any questions that you might have about the use, the care of your convection steam oven. It may also not be just for the convection steam oven, but for the M series oven or our dual fuel ranges or anything like that. We're here to provide you with that support more than anything else, so that you really enjoy your time with the appliances. So please reach out. That's what we're here for at Roth. We would love to support you and make that that experience go as far as it can. So, all right, questions?
We've got a question. When we send out the recipe, if we could include the kind of scaling of the grams for different numbers of loaves, so maybe
Sure.
we can include that.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the recipe that I've written, it'll send you, it comes both in the measurement in weight, but also in just, you know, cups and teaspoons and things like that, just in case you don't have a scale. But I do recommend that if you are going to be very serious about baking bread, that you invest in a good kitchen scale. Digital, preferably. They don't go out of calibration. What other questions do we have?
And again, if anybody is having troubles with the chat, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question with your voice.
We're always happy to hear your voice.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, I can't share
Hi.
the bread. Oh, there we go.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This is not about the bread, and I'm sorry I came in so late. My name is Cheryl, and when you were talking about having a roast in the oven and leaving it on because guests, you know, we were having our cocktails and whatever,
Right.
which happens frequently here.
Uh-huh.
You said leave the roast in the oven. Did you say turn the oven off?
Just leave the probe inserted in the oven. You'll end. So let's say the cooking cycle is done, right?
Right.
It's reached the temperature that you want. That's fine. You'll just hit end, right? But leave the oven door closed, leave the probe attached, and it will hold it at that temperature until you're ready to serve it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you so much, and it's been very informative again today. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so glad you could join us today. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben.
Uh-huh.
Hey, Ben, I wanted to just thank you so much for this. I have 4 pages of notes.
Wow.
And it was so good to see you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad you were able to join us and get some information. And again, you know, if there's ever a question about, you know, something that you're just a little unsure about baking or roasting, I really do encourage reach out, and I'm happy to respond.
Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions out there? Lynn, anything in the chat?
I don't have anything in the chat.
All right. Well, again, if you come up with a question, of course, it happens all the time. You know, you don't think you have a question now, but 2 minutes after we end the call, you'll say, oh, I should have asked about how to bake my creme brulee in the convection steam oven. Just send us a note and we'll be happy to shoot you some answers for that. And again, if you need some resources and stuff like that, but do expect you'll get recipes here later on today or maybe early tomorrow from both yesterday and today's session. So anyway, thank you again for everybody for joining us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. Chuck just asked what's next.
What's next? I don't know, Chuck. It may be that this is going to become our immediate future. We may be having to do some stuff like this. So we'll definitely we'll chat with our boss and see what she looks for in terms of expectations from us and how we can support you. And maybe there'll be a lot more stuff that we can put up on our Instagram pages and also on our YouTube channel, so you can see. It won't be live like this, but the content is certainly very good. So.
We also had another question, just asking about when the breakout for the older models is.
Sure.
I've kind of been taking notes as I've been going through on who I have. I've got Judy, Liz, Kent, Brian, and Chris.
Sure.
I see somebody asked a question. Could you please let me know what your name is? It says iPad 90. I had trouble yesterday trying to track down some folks who had some questions because I couldn't tell what their real name was based on their Zoom call or Zoom name.
So hopefully we can get that breakout put together sometime next week. I'm hoping maybe early next week would be great. Lynn and I will put our heads together and send out an invite for those people, for those of you who have the older model, so we can address some of your questions and some of the unique features of that model. We'll definitely address those as a group next week. So hopefully early next week we can do that. We should have plenty of time to do that next week.
And the
Instagram page. So the Instagram page for our content is Roth Living Lifestyle. So just go on Instagram and look for the Roth Living Lifestyle. And then also the YouTube channel is just Roth Living. And you'll find both, all the videos are there on the YouTube channel, but the Instagram channel is more dedicated to just more interesting content in terms of recipes and things like that. Not so much about how to clean your M series or maintain your griddle, something like that. It's a little more about the fun stuff when you're using the appliance as opposed to maintaining it. So, I thought there was another question I saw pop up there in the chat.
Yeah. Excuse me. Just when we do that breakout session, we'll get really close up in there.
Yes.
As far as the controls, we understand that they're a little bit different.
Right.
So we'll take note of that and make sure we show you everything we can.
Right. Absolutely.
Perfect.
All right.
All right.
Well, if there are no more questions, again, look for our email with recipe content. Send us any feedback that you think would be helpful to us. We're definitely open to all things to make this a better experience, because it's really new for all of us in many ways. And so I have to say, though, today was much easier than yesterday. So anyway, we're very happy to do this for you, and we look forward to chatting with you all again soon. So thanks so much. So here's Lynn.
Hi, everybody. All right.
Anyway, thanks again, everyone. Stay safe, be healthy, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again soon.